The blood on Delilah Greene's sleeve was not her own, and that terrified her more than anything else that had happened in the past 48 hours. She stumbled through the darkness of the Texas plains, her skirts torn and mudded, her feet blistering inside her worn leather boots. The year was 1878, and Gonzales, Texas, lay somewhere behind her in the distance, but she couldn't go back. Not after what had happened. Not after she'd watched her uncle collapse in the street, shot down by men who claimed he owed them money. Not after they'd turned their eyes on her, saying she'd have to work off his debts one way or another, their intentions clear in their leering smiles. So she'd run. She'd grabbed what little she could carry, and she'd run into the night like a coward, leaving behind the only family she had left in the world, already dead in the dust. The moon hung low and heavy in the sky, casting strange shadows across the scrubland. Delilah's lungs burned with each breath, and her vision swam with exhaustion. She'd been walking for hours, maybe longer. Time had lost all meaning somewhere between the fear and the grief. When she finally saw the flicker of a campfire in the distance, she didn't know whether to feel relief or terror. Out here, a stranger could be salvation or death, and there was no way to know which until it was too late. But her body made the decision for her, her legs carrying her forward even as her mind screamed warnings. She got close enough to see the silhouette of a man sitting by the fire, his horse grazing nearby, before her strength finally gave out. The ground rushed up to meet her, and the last thing she heard before darkness claimed her was the sound of boots running toward her across the hard earth. When Delilah woke, the sun was just beginning to paint the eastern horizon in shades of pink and gold. She was lying on a bedroll that smelled of leather and wood smoke, a blanket tucked carefully around her. Her heart hammered in her chest as she sat up quickly, too quickly, and the world tilted sideways. Easy there. The voice was deep and calm, and when she turned toward it, she saw a man crouched by the fire, poking at it with a stick. He was young, maybe mid-20s, with sun-darkened skin and dark hair that fell to his collar. When he glanced at her, his eyes were a striking gray-green, the color of sage after rain. "You've been through something. Don't need to make it worse by passing out again." "Who are you?" Her voice came out as a croak, her throat dry as sand. "Name's Zachary James," he said, reaching for a canteen and holding it out to her. "Most folks call me Zach. Found you collapsed near my camp last night. Figured leaving you out there wasn't much of an option." Delilah took the canteen with shaking hands and drank deeply, the water like salvation on her parched tongue. When she finally lowered it, she found him watching her with an expression that wasn't quite curiosity and wasn't quite concern, but something in between. "Thank you," she managed. "I'm Delilah Greene." He nodded once, as if the name meant something to him, though she couldn't imagine how. "You're a long way from anywhere, Miss Greene, and that blood on your sleeve suggests you didn't come out here for a pleasant evening stroll." Her hand flew to her sleeve instinctively, and the memories came flooding back with such force that she felt sick. "My uncle," she whispered. "They killed him. In Gonzales. They said he owed them money, but I don't think he did. I think they just wanted an excuse. And then they said I'd have to pay his debts, but the way they looked at me." She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't put words to the horror she'd seen in those men's eyes. Zach's expression hardened, a muscle jumping in his jaw. "You got names for these men?" "I don't know." "I didn't stay to ask." She pulled the blanket tighter around herself, suddenly cold despite the warmth of the rising sun. "I just ran. I'm a coward." "You're alive," Zach said simply. "That's not cowardice. That's sense." He stood, moving with an easy grace that spoke of years spent in the saddle, and walked over to his horse. The animal was a sturdy bay gelding with intelligent eyes. From the saddlebags, Zach pulled out some dried meat and hardtack, along with a small cloth package that turned out to contain cornbread. He brought it all back to the fire and handed her a portion. "Eat," he said. "Then we'll figure out what comes next." Delilah wanted to argue that she couldn't possibly eat, that her stomach was twisted in too many knots, but the moment the food touched her lips, hunger overrode everything else. She couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten. Yesterday morning, maybe, before the world had fallen apart. They ate in silence for a while, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the occasional snort from Zach's horse. Finally, when she'd finished every crumb he'd given her, Delilah worked up the courage to ask, "What were you doing out here? Are you a rancher?" Zach shook his head, a faint smile touching his lips. "Not exactly. I work wherever the work is. Been doing some cattle drives, some ranch hand work. Was heading north to see about a job when I made camp last night." He paused, studying her. "Question is, what are you going to do now?" It was the question Delilah had been avoiding since she woke up. What was she going to do? She had no money, no family, no home to return to. Even if those men hadn't been looking for her, she had nothing left in Gonzales. "I don't know," she admitted, and hated how small her voice sounded. Zach was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. Then he seemed to come to some kind of decision. "Town called Comfort is about 2 days' ride north of here. It's small but decent. There's a woman there, Mrs. Alina Davies, who runs a boarding house. She's always looking for help and she's fair. I could take you there if you want. Get you settled." The offer was so unexpected, so genuinely kind that Delilah felt tears prick at her eyes. "Why would you do that? You don't know me." "Don't have to know you to see you need help," Zach said simply. "And I don't much care for men who prey on women. If I can keep you out of their reach, seems like the right thing to do." Delilah nodded, not trusting her voice to speak. After a moment she managed, "Thank you. I'll find a way to repay you somehow." "Don't worry about that," Zach said, already beginning to pack up the camp. "Just worry about getting through today." They set out within the hour, Delilah riding behind Zach on his horse. She'd ridden before, but never like this, pressed close to a stranger's back, her arms wrapped around his waist for balance. It should have felt uncomfortable or frightening, but instead she felt safer than she had since her uncle died. Zach was solid and warm, and he handled the horse with the kind of confidence that came from years of experience. The landscape rolled past them in shades of brown and green, dotted with mesquite and prickly pear. The sun climbed higher, turning the air hot and still. Occasionally, they'd pass a jackrabbit or hear the distant call of a hawk, but mostly there was just the steady rhythm of the horse's hooves and the creak of leather. Around midday, they stopped to rest near a narrow creek that cut through the landscape like a silver ribbon. Zach helped her down from the horse, and Delilah tried not to notice the strength in his hands, or the way his touch was gentle despite the calluses on his palms. While the horse drank, Zach refilled their canteens and Delilah splashed water on her face, washing away the dust and some of the dried blood on her sleeve. When she looked up, she found him watching her again with that same unreadable expression. "You ever fired a gun, Miss Greene?" The question caught her off guard. "What? No. My uncle never thought it was necessary. He said that's what men were for." Zach made a non-committal sound. "And where is your uncle now?" The words could have been cruel, but they weren't. They were simply honest, and that honesty cut deeper than any malice could have. Delilah looked down at her hands, at the blood still staining her sleeve. "Dead," she whispered. "I'm sorry," Zach said, and he sounded like he meant it. "But that's exactly why I'm asking. Out here, you can't always count on someone else being around to protect you. Sometimes you've got to be able to protect yourself." He reached for his gun belt, unbuckling it with practiced ease, and pulled out his revolver. It was a Colt, well-maintained but clearly used. He checked to make sure it was unloaded, then held it out to her. "I'm going to teach you how to shoot." Delilah stared at the gun like it was a rattlesnake. "I can't." "You can," Zach said firmly. "And you will. Because next time someone threatens you, you're going to have a choice about what happens. You're going to have power over your own fate." Slowly, hesitantly, Delilah reached out and took the gun. It was heavier than she'd expected, the metal warm from being against Zach's body. Her hand trembled slightly as she held it. Zach moved to stand behind her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him. "First thing you need to know is how to hold it properly. You've got to respect the weapon, but you can't be afraid of it." He reached around her, his hands covering hers, adjusting her grip. His touch was professional, instructive, but Delilah's heart still raced at the proximity. She could smell him now, leather and smoke and something else, something clean and masculine that made her stomach flutter in a way that had nothing to do with fear. "Like this," he said, his breath warm against her ear. "Firm but not tight. You want to be steady." He stepped back, and she immediately felt the absence of him like a cold wind, but she kept her grip on the gun, trying to remember everything he'd shown her. "Now stance," Zach continued. He nudged her feet wider apart with his boot. "You need to be grounded, solid. The recoil is going to want to push you back, so you've got to be ready for it." He loaded a single bullet into the chamber, then pointed to an old piece of driftwood about 20 feet away. "That's your target. When you're ready, aim and squeeze the trigger. Don't pull, squeeze. Slow and steady." Delilah raised the gun, her arms shaking with the effort of holding it level. She tried to focus on the driftwood, but everything felt wrong. Her grip, her stance, her breathing, everything. "I can't do this," she said, lowering the gun. Zach moved to stand in front of her, ducking his head slightly so he could look into her eyes. His expression was serious, intense in a way that made her breath catch. "You can," he said. "You're stronger than you know. Don't let anyone say different." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. They weren't just about shooting a gun, and they both knew it. They were about everything, about survival and strength and refusing to be a victim. Delilah raised the gun again, and this time her hands didn't shake. She focused on the driftwood, on Zach's words echoing in her mind, on the feeling of power that came from holding this weapon. She squeezed the trigger. The gun bucked in her hands, the sound exploding across the quiet landscape, and the driftwood splintered into pieces. For a moment, Delilah just stood there, stunned. Then a smile spread across her face, genuine and surprised and triumphant all at once. "I did it," she breathed. "You did," Zach agreed, and when she looked at him, he was smiling too. It transformed his face, made him look younger and softer, and Delilah felt something warm unfurl in her chest. They spent another hour by the creek, Zach teaching her how to reload, how to aim more carefully, how to clean and maintain the weapon. He was patient and thorough, never condescending, treating her like a student who deserved respect. It was so different from how her uncle had treated her, always patting her on the head and telling her not to worry about such things. By the time they mounted up again to continue their journey, Delilah felt different. Stronger, yes, but also more alert, more present. As if she'd been sleepwalking through her life until now and had finally opened her eyes. They rode until dusk, making camp in a small grove of cottonwood trees. Zach built a fire while Delilah tended to the horse, brushing him down the way Zach had shown her. The simple task was oddly soothing, the horse's warm solidity comforting. When she returned to the fire, Zach had laid out their bedrolls on opposite sides of the flames. He handed her more dried meat and hardtack, along with some wild onions he'd found growing nearby. "It's not much," he apologized. "It's perfect," Delilah said and meant it. She couldn't remember the last time someone had taken care of her like this, making sure she was fed and safe and comfortable. They ate in companionable silence, watching the flames dance and listening to the night sounds of the prairie. Crickets chirped, and somewhere in the distance a coyote howled. "Can I ask you something?" Delilah said finally. "Sure." "Why did you help me, really?" She looked at him across the fire, trying to read his expression in the flickering light. "You could have just left me there, or dropped me at the nearest town and been on your way. But instead you're taking me all the way to comfort, teaching me things, treating me like I matter. Why?" Zach was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and rough. "Had a sister once. Younger than me. Sweet girl, always laughing. When I was 19 and she was 18, she caught the eye of a man in town. Older fellow, owned a saloon. He pursued her hard, and my parents thought it was a good match. Security, they said, stability." He paused, his jaw tight. 3 months after they married, she was dead. He said she fell down the stairs. But I saw the bruises on her arms, the way she'd flinched whenever he came near in those last weeks. I knew the truth, but I couldn't prove it, and back then, what happened between a man and his wife wasn't anybody else's business. Delilah's heart ached for him, for the pain she could hear beneath his carefully controlled words. "I'm so sorry. I made myself a promise that day," Zach continued, "that I'd never stand by and do nothing when I saw someone who needed help, that I'd never let another woman suffer if there was something I could do to prevent it." He looked up at her, his eyes catching the firelight. "So that's why, Miss Greene, that's why I helped you." "Delilah," she said softly. "You can call me Delilah." "Delilah," he repeated, and the way he said her name made something flutter in her chest. That night, as she lay in her bedroll staring up at the stars, Delilah thought about everything that had happened. 2 days ago, she'd been a different person. Sheltered, dependent, afraid. Her uncle had meant well, but he'd kept her in a cage made of protection and propriety. And now he was gone, and the cage had broken open, and she was terrified and free all at once. But she wasn't alone. Zach was lying on the other side of the dying fire, his breathing deep and even, his presence a comfort in the darkness. She barely knew him, but she trusted him in a way she'd never trusted anyone. He'd shown her kindness when he had no reason to, and he'd given her something even more valuable than safety. He'd given her the tools to save herself. "You're stronger than you know. Don't let anyone say different." She fell asleep with those words echoing in her mind like a prayer. The next day dawned clear and hot. They broke camp early and rode north, the landscape gradually changing as they traveled. The flat plains gave way to rolling hills, and the air smelled different, richer somehow, with more vegetation. Around mid-morning, they came across a homestead. It was small, just a rough cabin and a few outbuildings, with a vegetable garden struggling in the hard soil. A woman was outside hanging laundry, and when she saw them approaching, she shaded her eyes with her hand. Zach raised his hand in greeting as they drew near. "Morning, madam. We're heading north to comfort. Would you be willing to trade some cornbread or biscuits if you have any? I can offer ammunition or help with chores." The woman studied them for a moment, her gaze shrewd. She was middle-aged, with graying hair and work-worn hands, but her eyes were kind. Finally, she nodded. "I've got biscuits, and if you've got any skill with a hammer, my chicken coop's falling apart. Would appreciate the help." "Yes, madam," Zach said, dismounting and helping Delilah down. "I'd be happy to fix it." While Zach worked on the chicken coop, Delilah helped the woman, whose name was Martha, with her laundry. Martha eyed her curiously but didn't pry, for which Delilah was grateful. They worked in companionable silence, hanging sheets and shirts on the line to dry in the hot sun. When Zach finished with the chicken coop, Martha insisted they come inside for a proper meal. The cabin was simple but clean, with wildflowers in a jar on the table and curtains at the windows. Martha served them beans and rice with the promised biscuits, along with butter she'd churned herself. "You two married?" Martha asked as they ate, her tone casual but her eyes sharp. "No, madam," Zach said. "I'm helping Miss Greene get to Comfort. She's going to work for Mrs. Davies at the boarding house." Martha nodded slowly, still studying them. "That's good. Eleanor Davies is a good woman. She'll treat you fair." She turned her attention to Delilah. "You've got a good man helping you there. Not many would go so far out of their way." Delilah felt her cheeks heat. "I know. I'm very grateful." After the meal, they thanked Martha profusely and prepared to continue their journey. But as Zach was checking the saddle, Martha pulled Delilah aside. "I don't know your story, dear, and I'm not asking," the older woman said quietly. "But I know a woman running from something when I see one. You've got fear in your eyes, but you've also got strength. Don't lose that strength. And that man there," she nodded toward Zach, "he looks at you like you're something precious. Don't let that slip away either." Delilah opened her mouth to protest that there was nothing between her and Zach, that they'd only just met. But Martha just patted her arm and walked back into the cabin, leaving Delilah standing there with her words echoing in her ears. "He looks at you like you're something precious. Did he?" Delilah climbed back onto the horse behind Zach, wrapping her arms around his waist once more, and found herself paying more attention to him than she had before. The way he sat so easily in the saddle, the strength in his back beneath her hands. The care he took to make sure she was comfortable before spurring the horse forward. Maybe Martha had seen something Delilah had been too caught up in her own fear to notice. They reached Comfort late the following afternoon. It was a small town, smaller than Gonzales, with a single main street lined with businesses. There was a general store, a saloon, a church, and various other establishments, all with that look of newness that characterized so many Texas towns in these years of growth and change. The boarding house was near the end of the street, a two-story building with a wide porch and rocking chairs out front. Zach helped Delilah down from the horse and tied the reins to the hitching post. "You ready?" he asked. Delilah nodded, though her stomach was in knots. This was it. The beginning of her new life, whatever that was going to look like. They climbed the steps together, and Zach knocked on the door. After a moment, it opened to reveal a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked dark hair piled on her head and sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. She was dressed practically in a simple calico dress with an apron over it, and she held herself with an air of competence and authority. "Zachary James," she said, breaking into a smile. "I haven't seen you in months. What brings you back this way? Hello, Mrs. Davies," Zach said, removing his hat. "I've brought someone to meet you. This is Miss Delilah Greene. She's looking for work and a place to stay, and I thought of you immediately." Mrs. Davies' gaze shifted to Delilah, assessing her in a way that was thorough but not unkind. "Is that so? Well, come in, both of you. Let's have some coffee and talk." The interior of the boarding house was welcoming, with polished wood floors and furniture that was simple but well made. Mrs. Davies led them to a sitting room and gestured for them to sit while she disappeared into the kitchen. She returned a few minutes later with a tray holding 3 cups of coffee and a plate of cookies. "Now then," she said, settling into a chair and fixing Delilah with those sharp eyes. "Tell me about yourself, Miss Greene. Where are you from? What kind of work can you do?" Delilah took a breath and told her story, leaving out the most painful details but being honest about the essentials. Her uncle's death, the men who'd threatened her, her flight into the prairie. Zach's rescue and his kindness in bringing her here. Mrs. Davies listened without interrupting, her expression growing more sympathetic as the story went on. When Delilah finished, The older woman nodded slowly. "You've been through quite an ordeal," she said, "and you're looking to start fresh here in comfort." "Yes, madam," Delilah said. "I can cook and clean and sew. I'm a hard worker and I'll do whatever you need. I just need a chance." Mrs. Davies studied her for another long moment, then smiled. "I think we can manage that. I do need help around here. I've got 6 rooms upstairs that I rent out, and keeping up with the cooking and cleaning for guests is more than I can handle alone anymore. I can offer you room and board plus a small wage. The room would be up in the attic. Nothing fancy, but it's clean and private. You'd be expected to help with meals, laundry, and keeping the common areas tidy. Does that sound acceptable?" Relief flooded through Delilah so powerfully she felt dizzy. "Yes, madam. That sounds more than acceptable, thank you. Good. You can start tomorrow. Today you just get settled in and rest." Mrs. Davies turned to Zach. "And you, young man, are you staying in town for a while or are you heading out?" Zach glanced at Delilah, something unreadable in his expression. "I was planning to head north for that job, but it's getting late. If you've got a room available, I could stay the night and leave in the morning." "Room 3 is open," Mrs. Davies said. "Supper's at 6. Delilah felt an unexpected pang at the thought of Zach leaving. He'd been her constant companion for the past 2 days, her protector and teacher, and the idea of suddenly being without him left her feeling untethered. But she couldn't very well ask him to stay. He had his own life, his own plans. She'd already taken up too much of his time. Mrs. Davies showed Delilah up to the attic room. It was small, with slanted ceilings and a single window that looked out over the street, but it was clean and bright, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a trunk for her belongings. Not that she had many belongings. Everything she owned fit in the small bundle she'd been carrying. "There are some dresses in that trunk that might fit you," Mrs. Davies said. "They belonged to my daughter before she got married and moved to San Antonio. You're welcome to them." "Thank you," Delilah said, her throat tight with emotion. "You're very kind." Mrs. Davies patted her shoulder. "We women have to look after each other out here. Lord knows the men don't always manage it." She paused at the door. "That Zachary James is a good man, though, one of the best I've met." "You're lucky he found you." "I know," Delilah whispered. After Mrs. Davies left, Delilah sat on the edge of the bed and let herself cry. Not from sadness exactly, but from the overwhelming rush of everything that had happened. Grief for her uncle, terror at what might have happened if Zach hadn't found her, relief at having a safe place to stay, and something else. Something complicated and confusing that had to do with the cowboy who'd saved her and was now preparing to leave. She cried until she had no tears left, then washed her face at the basin and changed into one of the dresses from the trunk. It was a simple blue cotton dress, a little loose in some places and a little tight in others, but it was clean and whole and so much better than her torn and blood-stained clothes. When she came down for supper, she found Zach already in the dining room. He'd cleaned up too, his face freshly shaved and his hair combed back. When he saw her, something flickered in his eyes and his lips curved into a smile. "You look nice," he said. "Thank you," Delilah replied, suddenly shy. "So do you." Supper was a lively affair. Besides Delilah and Zach, there were 3 other boarders. A traveling salesman named Mr. Porter, a school teacher named Miss Williams, and a young man named Henry who worked at the general store. Mrs. Davies presided over the table like a benevolent general, making sure everyone had enough to eat and keeping the conversation flowing. The food was simple but good. Roast chicken with potatoes and carrots, fresh bread with butter, and apple pie for dessert. Delilah hadn't realized how hungry she was until she started eating, and she had to force herself to slow down and eat like a lady rather than wolfing it all down. After supper, while Mrs. Davies and the others retired to the sitting room, Delilah stepped out onto the porch for some air. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, and the street was quiet except for the sounds drifting from the saloon down the way. She'd only been standing there a few minutes when the door opened behind her, and Zach joined her. They stood side by side in comfortable silence, watching the last light fade from the sky. "You leave tomorrow?" Delilah finally asked, not looking at him. "That was the plan," Zach said. His voice was quiet, thoughtful. "That job won't wait forever." "Of course," Delilah said quickly. "I understand. You've already done so much for me. I can't expect you to stay." "Is that what you think?" Zach turned to face her, and there was something intense in his expression that made her breath catch. "That I'm staying away because you're expecting it? I don't know," Delilah admitted. "I don't know what I'm saying. I just know that I'm going to miss you, and that feels foolish because I've only known you for 2 days." "2 days can be a lifetime out here," Zach said. "I've known men for years and never trusted them as much as I trust you right now." Delilah's heart hammered in her chest. "What are you saying?" Zach ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration or uncertainty. "I'm saying that job I was riding toward doesn't seem as important as it did 3 days ago. I'm saying that I keep thinking about leaving tomorrow and the thought sits wrong with me. I'm saying—" He trailed off, shaking his head. "Hell, I don't know what I'm saying. Maybe I'm crazy." "If you're crazy, then so am I," Delilah whispered, "because I keep thinking the same things." They looked at each other in the fading light, and Delilah felt the air between them charge with possibility. This was madness. They barely knew each other. She had no business feeling this way about a man she'd met when she was running for her life. But the heart didn't care about logic or propriety or good sense. The heart wanted what it wanted. "Stay," Delilah said, barely louder than a breath. "Just for a little while. Stay and let's see what this is." Zach's expression softened, and he reached out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered against her cheek, warm and gentle. "Yeah," he said. "I think I can do that." The next morning, Zach found work at the livery stable. The owner, a gruff old man named Samuel Tucker, needed someone who could handle horses and wasn't afraid of hard work. Zach fit the bill perfectly, and within an hour he'd been hired on with the understanding that he could leave if something better came along. But as the days turned into weeks, nothing better came along, and Zach showed no signs of wanting to leave anyway. Delilah settled into her new life at the boarding house with surprising ease. Mrs. Davies was a fair employer, firm but kind, and she seemed to genuinely care about Delilah's well-being. The work was hard, rising before dawn to start breakfast and often not finishing until late in the evening after the dinner dishes were done. But Delilah didn't mind. It kept her hands busy and her mind occupied, and at the end of each day she could fall into her narrow bed exhausted but satisfied. And every day, at some point, Zach would find a reason to stop by. Sometimes he'd come for dinner, paying for a meal like any other customer. Sometimes he'd offer to help with repairs around the boarding house, fixing a squeaky step or a loose shutter. And sometimes he'd simply appear on the porch in the evening, waiting to walk with Delilah when she had a few minutes free. On Sundays, the boarding house closed for dinner, and Mrs. Davies insisted that Delilah take the afternoon off. Those Sundays became precious to Delilah, hours carved out of time where she and Zach could be together without interruption or expectation. They'd walk through the countryside surrounding comfort, following creek beds and game trails, talking about everything and nothing. Zach told her about growing up on a small ranch in southern Texas, about learning to ride before he could walk and how to rope before he could write his name, about losing his parents to fever when he was 17 and how he drifted ever since, never quite finding a place that felt like home. Delilah told him about her childhood too, about her parents dying when she was young and being raised by her uncle, about how he'd meant well but had kept her sheltered, always insisting that the world was too dangerous for a woman alone, about how she'd sometimes felt like she was suffocating under all that protection, but had never known how to say so. "Feels like I've lived more in these past few weeks than in all the years before," Delilah said one Sunday as they sat by a creek, their feet dangling in the cool water. "Is that strange?" "No," Zach said. He was leaning back on his hands, his face tilted toward the sun, and Delilah couldn't help but admire the line of his jaw, the strength in his shoulders. "I know exactly what you mean. Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Staying here instead of taking that job?" Zach turned his head to look at her, and the warmth in his eyes made her stomach flutter. Not even for a second. They'd grown comfortable with each other, easy in a way that usually took years rather than weeks. Zach made her laugh with his dry wit and his stories from the road. And Delilah found herself opening up in ways she never had before, sharing thoughts and dreams she'd kept hidden even from herself. But there was also a tension between them, something unspoken that grew stronger with each passing day. It was there in the way Zach's hand would linger when he helped her down from a fence, in the way Delilah's breath would catch when he stood close to her, in the long looks they'd exchange across the dining room at supper, conversations happening without words. Mrs. Davies noticed, of course. She was too sharp to miss it. One morning, as Delilah was kneading bread dough in the kitchen, the older woman said casually, "That Zachary James is courting you properly." Delilah felt her cheeks heat. "I wouldn't say courting exactly." "What would you say then?" Mrs. Davies asked, amusement in her voice. "Because the way I see it, he's around here every day, finds excuses to spend time with you and looks at you like you hung the moon. That's courting." "We're just friends," Delilah protested weakly. "Hum," Mrs. Davies said in a tone that made it clear she didn't believe that for a second. "Well, when you and your friend figure out what you really are to each other, I hope you'll let me know. I do like to stay informed about the goings-on in my own house." But despite the teasing, Delilah could see the approval in Mrs. Davies' eyes. She liked Zach, that much was clear, and she seemed to genuinely hope that something would come of their relationship, if it was a relationship. Delilah still wasn't entirely sure what to call it. The question was answered on a warm evening in late August. Delilah had finished her work for the day and was sitting on the porch, enjoying the slight breeze that had finally chased away some of the day's heat. Zach appeared around the corner, as he so often did these days, and climbed the steps to join her. "Evening," he said, settling into the rocking chair beside hers. "Evening," she replied, smiling at him. "How was work?" "Good. Mr. Tucker's mare finally foaled, pretty little filly, all legs and attitude." He rocked back in his chair, his gaze distant. "Made me think about the future. About having a place of my own someday, maybe raising horses." "That sounds wonderful," Delilah said. "You'd be good at it." "Maybe," Zach said, "but a dream like that, it's not meant to be done alone." He turned to look at her, and the intensity in his eyes made her pulse quicken. "Delilah, I need to tell you something." "All right," she said, her voice barely steady. "When I found you out on that prairie, I thought I was just helping someone in trouble, doing the right thing like I promised myself I would after my sister died. But somewhere along the way it became more than that." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped together. "You became more than that." Delilah's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. "Zach, let me finish," he said gently. "I'm not good with words, never have been, but I need you to know this. These weeks with you, they've been the best of my life. Getting to know you, watching you grow stronger and more confident every day, seeing you smile and laugh and become yourself without anyone telling you who you're supposed to be. It's been an honor, Delilah, and somewhere along the way, I fell in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, huge and terrifying and wonderful. Delilah felt tears prick at her eyes, but they were good tears, happy tears. "I love you too," she said, her voice breaking. "I think I have since you told me I was stronger than I knew. Since you gave me the tools to save myself instead of just saving me. Since you looked at me like I was someone worth knowing, not just someone to be protected." Zach crossed the space between them in one smooth movement, kneeling in front of her chair and taking her hands in his. "I want a future with you, Delilah. I want to build something real, something lasting. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep with you every night. I want to raise horses and maybe children and grow old watching sunsets from our own porch." He paused, his gray-green eyes searching hers. "I want to marry you if you'll have me." Delilah couldn't speak past the lump in her throat, so she just nodded, tears streaming down her face. Zach made a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and pulled her into his arms. She slid off the chair and into his embrace, and they knelt there together on the porch, holding each other as if they'd never let go. When they finally pulled apart, Zach cupped her face in his hands and kissed her. It was soft and sweet and full of promise, and Delilah felt like her heart might burst from the joy of it. "Yes," she finally managed to say. "Yes, I'll marry you. Yes to all of it." They married 3 weeks later in the little church on Main Street with Mrs. Davies standing up as Delilah's matron of honor and Mr. Tucker serving as Zach's best man. It was a simple ceremony, but to Delilah it was perfect. She wore a dress that Mrs. Davies had helped her sew from pale blue fabric, and Zach wore his Sunday best, his hair combed back and his eyes shining with happiness. Reverend Thomas, who'd come to Comfort just a year earlier to establish the church, performed the ceremony. His voice was warm and sincere as he spoke about love and commitment and the journey they were embarking on together. When it came time for the vows, Delilah's voice was steady and sure. "I, Delilah Greene, take you, Zachary James, to be my husband. I promise to love you, to support you, to build a life with you that honors both of us. I promise to be your partner in all things, to face whatever comes with courage and hope." Zach's voice was thick with emotion when he spoke his vows. "I, Zachary James, take you, Delilah Greene, to be my wife. I promise to love you, to cherish you, to never let you forget how strong you are. I promise to build a life with you where you're free to be yourself, where your voice matters, where we face everything together." When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, and Zach kissed her there in front of God and their friends, Delilah felt like she was finally home. Not in a place, but in a person. In this partnership they'd chosen, this future they were building together. The whole town turned out for the celebration afterward. Mrs. Davies had insisted on hosting it at the boarding house, and she'd spent days preparing food and decorating. There was music and dancing, and Delilah whirled through it all in a happy daze, Zach's hand always in hers. At one point, Martha, the woman from the homestead they'd stopped at on their journey to Comfort, appeared in the crowd. She'd ridden all the way into town for the wedding, bringing a beautiful quilt she'd sewn as a gift. "I told you not to let him slip away," she said with a knowing smile, embracing Delilah warmly. "I didn't," Delilah replied, laughing. "Thank you for the advice." As the evening wore on and the celebration continued, Zach pulled Delilah aside and led her out to the porch, away from the noise and the crowd. The stars were brilliant overhead, and the night was warm and still. "Happy?" Zach asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind and resting his chin on top of her head. "More than I ever knew I could be," Delilah said, leaning back against him. "Though I keep waiting to wake up and find out this was all a dream." "It's real," Zach assured her, "and it's ours. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together." They'd already made plans for their future. Zach had been saving money from his work at the livery, and Delilah had her small wages from the boarding house. It would take time, but they were going to buy a piece of land just outside of town and start their own ranch. Nothing huge, just enough for some horses and maybe a few cattle. A place of their own where they could build a life. Mrs. Davies had promised that Delilah could continue working at the boarding house for as long as she wanted, until they were ready to start their ranch in earnest. And Mr. Tucker had told Zach that the job at the livery was his for as long as he needed it. They spent their wedding night in room 3 at the boarding house, the one Zach had stayed in that first night in comfort. Mrs. Davies had decorated it with wildflowers and left the window open to let in the breeze. It was simple and sweet, and to Delilah it was perfect. Zach was gentle and patient, taking his time, making sure she felt safe and cherished. They explored each other with wonder and tenderness, learning the geography of each other's bodies, discovering what brought pleasure and what made the other gasp. It was awkward at times and funny at others, but it was theirs, this intimacy they were creating together. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, Delilah's head on Zach's chest, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her back. "I never thought I could be this happy," Delilah whispered into the darkness. 3 months ago I was so lost. I didn't even know who I was beyond being my uncle's niece, beyond being the girl who needed protection. And now look at me. I'm someone's wife. I'm strong and capable. I have a future I actually want." "You always had that strength," Zach said. "I just helped you see it." "You did more than that," Delilah said, propping herself up on one elbow to look at him. "You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. You gave me the tools to build a new life. You showed me what love could look like when it's real and equal and honest." Zach reached up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing over her lips. "You did the same for me, you know. Before you, I was just drifting. No purpose, no home, no real future. You gave me something to build toward. Someone to build it with." They made love again in the soft hours before dawn, slower this time, savoring each moment. And when the sun finally rose, painting the room in shades of gold and pink, they lay wrapped around each other, content and complete. The first year of their marriage was hard work, but deeply satisfying. They both kept their jobs in town, saving every penny they could. Delilah became indispensable to Mrs. Davies, taking on more and more responsibility at the boarding house. She discovered she had a talent for management, for keeping track of supplies and schedules, for making guests feel welcome. Mrs. Davies began to talk about eventually making her a partner in the business, though that was still years away. Zach thrived at the livery stable, his skill with horses becoming well known throughout the area. People started bringing their difficult horses to him, the ones that others had given up on, and Zach would work with them patiently until they were calm and responsive. He had a gift, Mr. Tucker said, a way of understanding what an animal needed. On Sundays, they'd ride out to look at land. They found the perfect spot in the spring of 1879, about 5 miles outside of Comfort. It was 100 acres of rolling grassland with a creek running through it, and a grove of oak trees that would provide shade in the brutal Texas summers. The price was more than they'd hoped, but fair, and they put down everything they'd saved as a deposit, promising to pay the rest over the next 2 years. That same spring, Delilah realized she was pregnant. She'd missed 2 monthly courses and was feeling queasy in the mornings, and when she finally admitted her suspicions to Mrs. Davies, the older woman had smiled knowingly. "I wondered when you'd figure it out," she said. "You've had that look about you for weeks now." Delilah told Zach that evening when he came by after work. They walked out to their land, to the spot where they planned to build their house, and she took his hands in hers. "We're going to have a baby," she said simply. The expression on Zach's face was one Delilah would remember forever. Shock, then joy, then a tenderness so profound it brought tears to her eyes. He dropped to his knees and pressed his face against her still flat stomach, his arms wrapping around her waist. "A baby," he breathed. "We're going to be parents. Are you happy?" Delilah asked, running her fingers through his hair. "Happy doesn't even begin to cover it," Zach said, looking up at her with wet eyes. "Scared too, if I'm being honest, but mostly just grateful, so damn grateful. The pregnancy was not easy." The morning sickness lasted well into the 4th month, and the Texas heat made the later months uncomfortable. But Delilah had never felt more alive, more purposeful. She was creating life, growing their child inside her, and it felt like a miracle. Mrs. Davies fussed over her like a mother hen, making sure she didn't overwork herself and that she ate properly. The other women in town, many of whom Delilah had become friendly with over the past year, offered advice and hand-me-down baby clothes. The community embraced her in a way her old life in Gonzales never had. Zach was endlessly attentive, almost comically so. He worried about everything, from whether Delilah was eating enough to whether she was resting enough to whether the baby was moving enough. Delilah found it both touching and occasionally exasperating. "I'm not made of glass," she told him one evening when he tried to stop her from carrying a basket of laundry. "I'm pregnant, not helpless." "I know," Zach said. "I just want to take care of you." "You do," Delilah assured him, softening. "Every single day. But you also need to let me take care of myself. Remember what you taught me. I'm stronger than I know." Zach smiled ruefully. "Having my own words thrown back at me. Guess I deserve that." Their son was born in January of 1880 on a cold morning when frost silvered the grass and their breath came out in clouds. The labor was long and hard, and there were moments when Delilah thought she couldn't do it, that it was too much. But Mrs. Davies was there, coaching her through it, and Zach held her hand the entire time, whispering encouragement and love when the baby finally emerged, red-faced and wailing. Delilah felt a surge of love so powerful it nearly overwhelmed her. This tiny, perfect human with his father's gray-green eyes and a shock of dark hair was theirs. They'd made him. He was their future, their hope, their family. "He's beautiful," Zach said, his voice choked with emotion as he carefully took the baby from Mrs. Davies. "He's perfect." They named him William Thomas James, after Zach's father and the reverend who'd married them. Will, they called him, and he was the joy of their lives. The first few months were exhausting, filled with sleepless nights and endless diaper changes and the constant worry that they were somehow doing it wrong. But they figured it out together, learning as they went, supporting each other through the hard moments and celebrating the good ones. Will was 6 months old when they finally had enough money to start building their house on the land. It would be small at first, just 3 rooms, but it would be theirs, built with their own hands and their own labor. Zach did most of the construction work himself, with help from Mr. Tucker and some of the other men from town. Delilah helped when she could, holding Will on her hip while she measured and marked and fetched tools. It took the better part of the summer, but by September they had a house. Simple but solid, with a good roof and tight walls and windows that faced east to catch the morning sun. The day they moved in, carrying their few pieces of furniture and their growing collection of baby things, Delilah stood in the middle of their new home and cried. Not from sadness, but from the sheer, overwhelming rightness of it all. This was home. This was theirs. This was everything she'd never let herself dream of having. Zach came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her, careful not to squish Will, who was sleeping against her chest in a sling. "Welcome home, Mrs. James," he whispered into her hair. "Welcome home," she whispered back. They settled into their new life with surprising ease. Zach quit his job at the livery to focus on building their ranch. He started with 6 horses, bought cheap because they were considered troublesome, and worked his magic on them over the course of several months. By spring, they were well trained and sold for 4 times what he'd paid, giving them the capital to buy more. Delilah still helped at the boarding house a few days a week, bringing Will with her. Mrs. Davies doted on the baby and insisted that Delilah could work whatever schedule suited her. The money helped, but more than that, Delilah enjoyed the work and the social interaction. She'd spent too many years isolated. She wasn't about to become a hermit now. Their ranch grew slowly but steadily. By the time Will was 2, they had a dozen horses and a small herd of cattle. By the time he was 4, they'd expanded the house, adding 2 more bedrooms and a proper kitchen. By the time he was 6, the ranch was profitable enough that Delilah didn't need to work at the boarding house anymore, though she still helped out occasionally because she wanted to, not because she had to. They had 2 more children in those years. A daughter they named Sarah Eleanor, after Zach's sister and Mrs. Davies, born in 1882. And another son, James Robert, born in 1884. The house filled with noise and laughter and the beautiful chaos of family life. Delilah loved being a mother, though it was harder than she'd ever imagined. The constant demands, the worry, the exhaustion, all of it was real. But so was the joy. Watching her children grow and learn and become their own people was a privilege she never took for granted. And through it all, her relationship with Zach only grew stronger. They were partners in every sense of the word, making decisions together, supporting each other's dreams, weathering the hard times as a team. They still made time for each other, stealing moments alone whenever they could, whether it was an early morning ride before the children woke or a late-night conversation on the porch after everyone else was asleep. The passion between them hadn't dimmed either. If anything, it had deepened, becoming richer and more complex as they learned each other's bodies and desires over the years. They were comfortable with each other now, easy and familiar, but the spark was still there, the electric connection that had drawn them together from the beginning. One evening, when the children were all in bed and they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset, Delilah said, "Do you ever think about that night I stumbled into your camp? How different everything could have been if you just left me there or dropped me at the nearest town." "All the time," Zach admitted. "And every time I think about it, I'm grateful I made the choice I did. You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Delilah. You and those 3 beautiful children in there." He reached over and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "My whole life I was searching for something, not even knowing what it was. And then I found you, and suddenly everything made sense." "I feel the same way," Delilah said. "Before you, I didn't even know who I was. I was just this person living in someone else's shadow, being who they expected me to be. But you saw me, the real me, and you helped me become her." "You did that yourself," Zach said. "I just gave you the space to do it." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sky turn from orange to purple to the deep blue of twilight. Finally, Delilah said, "I want to teach Sarah to shoot, like you taught me." Zach turned to look at her, a slow smile spreading across his face. Yeah, Delilah said. "I want her to know she's strong, that she can take care of herself, that she doesn't have to depend on anyone else for her safety or her future. I want her to have the confidence I didn't have until you gave it to me." "Then we'll teach her together," Zach said, "when she's old enough. And we'll teach the boys too. All of them should know how to protect themselves and each other. True to their word, when Sarah turned 8, they taught her to shoot. She was a natural, with a steady hand and a good eye. Will and James learned too, though James was still a bit young at 4 to do more than watch and learn the safety rules. But it was Sarah who really took to it, who loved the sense of power and capability that came from knowing she could hit what she was aiming at. Delilah would take her out on Sunday afternoons, just the two of them, and they'd practice together. And Delilah would tell her daughter the same words Zach had told her all those years ago. "You're stronger than you know. Don't let anyone say different." Sarah would nod solemnly, taking the words to heart in a way that made Delilah's chest ache with love and pride. The years continued to pass, bringing both joy and sorrow. Mrs. Davies died in 1888, peacefully in her sleep, and Delilah mourned her like the mother she'd never had. Mr. Tucker followed a year later, and Zach helped organize a memorial service that brought out the whole town, but there were celebrations too. Will showed an aptitude for working with horses that rivaled his father's. Sarah developed a love of books and learning, and they scraped together money to send her to a boarding school in San Antonio when she was 14, knowing she needed opportunities that comfort couldn't provide. James surprised them all by showing an interest in medicine, spending hours reading every book on the subject he could get his hands on. Delilah and Zach supported all of it, encouraging their children to be whoever they wanted to be, to chase whatever dreams called to them. It was the gift Zach had given Delilah all those years ago, and now they gave it to their children in turn. In 1895, 17 years after Delilah had stumbled into Zach's camp, they celebrated their anniversary with a party at the ranch. Their children were there, along with what felt like half the town of Comfort. The house had been expanded again over the years, growing to accommodate their family and their lives, and it was full of laughter and music and love. Will was 15 now, tall and strong, with his father's quiet competence and his mother's determination. Sarah was 13 and home from boarding school for the summer, full of stories about her studies and her friends. James was 11, curious and compassionate, already talking about becoming a doctor someday. As Delilah looked around at the life they'd built, at the family they'd raised, at the community that had embraced them, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. She caught Zach's eye across the room, and he made his way to her, pulling her into his arms for a dance even though there wasn't really space for it. "Happy?" he asked, the same question he'd asked on their wedding night 17 years ago. "More than I ever dreamed possible," Delilah replied, resting her head against his chest and letting him lead her in a slow circle. "Thank you for finding me that night. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for loving me." "Thank you for letting me," Zach said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Thank you for building this life with me. Thank you for being my partner and my love and my home." They danced like that for a while, surrounded by their children and their friends, the future stretching out before them bright with promise. The years that followed brought their own challenges, as all years do. Will eventually took over most of the day-to-day running of the ranch, freeing Zach to focus on training the most difficult horses, the work he loved best. Sarah graduated from her boarding school and shocked everyone by announcing she wanted to become a teacher. She returned to Comfort and took over the one-room schoolhouse, bringing new energy and innovative ideas to the position. James did indeed become a doctor, leaving home at 18 to attend medical school in Houston. It was hard to see him go, but Delilah and Zach were so proud they could hardly stand it. Their youngest son, brilliant and kind, was going to spend his life helping people. It was more than they'd ever dared dream for their children. As they grew older, Delilah and Zach found themselves with more time for each other again. The children were grown and building their own lives. The ranch was successful and well established, and they could finally slow down a bit. They took to spending their evenings on the porch, just as they had when they were young, watching the sunset and talking about everything and nothing. Zach's hair had gone mostly gray by his early 50s, and Delilah had laugh lines around her eyes and silver streaking through her dark hair. But when they looked at each other, they still saw the young people they'd been, the cowboy and the frightened girl who'd found each other in the darkness and built something beautiful together. "I was thinking," Zach said one evening, "that we should take a trip. Maybe go see James in Houston. Or visit Sarah's friend in San Antonio that she's always talking about. Or just go somewhere we've never been. What do you think?" "I think that sounds wonderful," Delilah said, reaching for his hand. "Where do you want to go?" "Doesn't matter," Zach said. "As long as I'm with you." It was a simple sentiment, but it held the truth of their entire relationship. They'd built an extraordinary life together, but at its core, it was simple. It was love and partnership and the choice, made every single day, to keep choosing each other. They did take that trip, traveling to Houston to visit James and see the hospital where he was working. They were so proud of him, of the skilled, compassionate doctor he'd become. He'd met a woman, he told them shyly, a nurse at the hospital named Margaret. They'd been courting for 6 months, and it was serious. A year later, they attended James' wedding in Houston. It was a beautiful ceremony, and Margaret was lovely, warm and intelligent, and clearly devoted to their son. "Will brought a girl too, a rancher's daughter from a neighboring property named Catherine," and the way he looked at her reminded Delilah so much of how Zach had looked at her all those years ago. Sarah was still unmarried and showed no signs of wanting to change that, much to the consternation of some of the more traditional folks in Comfort. But she was happy, fulfilled by her teaching and her independence, and that was all Delilah and Zach cared about. They'd raised their daughter to know her own mind and follow her own path, and she was doing exactly that. Will and Catherine married in the spring of 1900, and exactly a year later, they made Delilah and Zach grandparents for the first time. A beautiful baby girl named Emma, with her grandmother's dark hair and her grandfather's gray-green eyes. Delilah held her granddaughter and cried, overwhelmed by the continuation of their story, the way love just kept growing and spreading, touching new lives. James and Margaret gave them a grandson the following year, a sturdy boy they named Zachary after his grandfather. Sarah remained happily unmarried but devoted to her niece and nephew, spoiling them terribly whenever she visited. Delilah and Zach settled into grandparenthood with joy. They loved having the children visit the ranch, teaching them to ride and rope and shoot, just as they'd taught their own children. The house was often full of laughter and chaos again, and Delilah loved every minute of it. One afternoon, when Emma was about 5 years old, she asked Delilah to tell her a story. They were sitting on the porch, shelling peas for dinner, and Emma was getting restless with the repetitive task. "What kind of story?" Delilah asked. "A real one," Emma said. "About when you were young." So Delilah told her. She told her about being scared and alone, about stumbling into a stranger's camp in the middle of the night, about the kind cowboy who'd helped her, who'd taught her to shoot, and told her she was stronger than she knew, about falling in love and building a life and creating a family. Emma listened with wide eyes, and when the story was finished, she said, "So Grandpa saved you?" "No," Delilah said gently. "He helped me save myself. That's different and it's better." "I want to be strong like you, Grandma," Emma said seriously. "You will be," Delilah promised, "because I'm going to teach you the same thing your grandpa taught me. You're stronger than you know, Emma. Don't let anyone say different." Emma nodded, taking the words to heart, and Delilah saw the future stretching out before this little girl, full of possibilities and choices and strength. That evening, after Emma and her parents had gone home and the house was quiet again, Delilah and Zach sat on their porch one more time. They were in their 60s now, their bodies slower and stiffer than they'd once been, but their love had only grown deeper with time. "I told Emma our story today," Delilah said. "Yeah. What did she think?" "She called it romantic," Delilah said with a smile, "which I suppose it is in its way. But it's also more than that. It's about strength and choice and becoming who you're meant to be." "It's about love," Zach said simply. "Everything else grew from that." "True," Delilah agreed. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "Do you ever think about what your life would have been like if we'd never met? If I hadn't stumbled into your camp that night?" "Sometimes," Zach admitted. "I think I'd still be drifting, still looking for something I couldn't name, still alone." He reached over and took her hand, his grip still strong despite the arthritis that was starting to stiffen his joints. "You gave me a home, Delilah, not just this ranch, but here." He pressed his other hand to his chest, over his heart. "You gave me a reason to stay in one place. A reason to build something lasting, a family to love and be loved by." "We gave that to each other," Delilah said. "That's what makes it special. It wasn't one person saving the other. It was two people choosing to build something together." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink and purple. Somewhere in the distance, they could hear the horses moving in the pasture, the low of cattle, the ordinary sounds of the life they'd built together. "Delilah," Zach said softly. "Yes, I love you. I've loved you since the first moment I saw you stumbling out of the darkness into my firelight, and I'll love you until my last breath and beyond." Delilah felt tears slip down her cheeks, but they were happy tears. "I love you too, with everything I am. Thank you for teaching me to be strong. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for choosing me every single day." "Always," Zach promised, "for all the days we have left," and he kept that promise. They had many more years together, watching their grandchildren grow, attending more weddings and birthdays and celebrations. They grew old together, their bodies wearing down but their love remaining constant, a foundation that nothing could shake. When Zach finally passed away in 1915, at the age of 63, Delilah was holding his hand. They were on their porch, watching the sunset as they'd done thousands of times before, and he simply closed his eyes and didn't open them again. It was peaceful, painless, and in some ways perfect. He died as he'd lived, with Delilah beside him and love surrounding them both. The grief was staggering, a physical weight that made it hard to breathe. For weeks, Delilah moved through her days in a fog, going through the motions but feeling hollow inside. But slowly, gradually, she remembered something Zach had taught her all those years ago. She was stronger than she knew, her children rallied around her, and her grandchildren visited often. The ranch continued to operate, now run primarily by Will and Catherine. And Delilah found purpose in telling their story, in making sure that the next generation understood what real love looked like, what real strength meant. She taught Emma to shoot, just as Zach had taught her. She told all her grandchildren about their grandfather, about his kindness and his wisdom and his unwavering belief in the strength of those he loved. She made sure his legacy lived on, not just in the successful ranch he'd built, but in the values he'd embodied and passed down. Delilah lived another 12 years without Zach, dying peacefully in her sleep in 1927 at the age of 68. Her children and grandchildren were with her, and in her final moments, she smiled, as if seeing something wonderful that only she could see. They buried her next to Zach on a hill overlooking the ranch, with a simple stone that read, "Delilah Greene James." Beloved wife, mother, grandmother, she was stronger than she knew. At the funeral, Emma, now a grown woman with children of her own, stood and told the story her grandmother had told her all those years ago, about the frightened girl and the kind cowboy, about learning to shoot and learning to be strong, about building a life based on love and partnership and choice. My grandmother taught me that strength isn't about never being afraid, Emma said, her voice clear and steady. It's about facing your fear and moving forward anyway. It's about knowing your worth and refusing to let anyone diminish it. It's about choosing love every single day, even when it's hard. She looked around at the gathered family and friends, at the legacy that Delilah and Zach had built together. That's the gift they gave us. That's what we need to remember and pass on to our own children. And they did. The story of Delilah and Zach became family legend, told and retold through the generations. The ranch continued to operate, staying in the family for decades. And every daughter in the family learned to shoot, and every one of them heard the words that had changed Delilah's life all those years ago. You're stronger than you know. Don't let anyone say different. It was more than a lesson in marksmanship. It was a philosophy, a way of life, a legacy of strength and love that continued long after both Delilah and Zach were gone. They'd built something that lasted, not just in land and property, but in the hearts and minds of everyone they'd touched. Years later, one of their great-great-granddaughters would stand on that same porch, looking out over the land that Delilah and Zach had claimed and nurtured and loved. She'd hold a rifle in her hands, feeling its weight and its power, and she'd remember the story of her ancestors. The frightened girl who'd found her strength. The kind cowboy who'd helped her find it. The love that had grown between them, deep and true and lasting. And she'd understand that she carried their strength in her blood, their love in her heart, their legacy in her hands. She was stronger than she knew, and she'd never let anyone say different. That was the true gift Zach had given Delilah all those years ago on a hot Texas afternoon by a narrow creek. Not just the ability to fire a gun, but the knowledge of her own worth, her own power, her own strength. And together, they'd built a love story that transcended their individual lives, touching generation after generation with its simple, powerful truth. Love and strength were not opposing forces. They were complements, two sides of the same coin. Being strong didn't mean going it alone. Being loved didn't mean being weak. True partnership meant supporting each other's strength, celebrating each other's growth, and choosing each other, over and over again, through all the days of your life. That was what Delilah and Zach had understood. That was what they'd lived. And that was the legacy they'd left behind, more valuable than any land or property or material wealth. They'd shown everyone who knew them what real love looked like. And in doing so, they'd changed the world one person, one family, one generation at a time. Their story ended as all stories must. But the love they'd shared, the strength they'd fostered, the family they'd built, those things continued. Those things endured. And in that way, Delilah and Zach lived on, forever young and forever in love, riding together into the sunset of memory and legacy. Their story a testament to the transformative power of love and the enduring strength of the human heart.